Good morning. Welcome to part 5 of my YouTube series, SF Mormon Questions. Today I'm going to be looking a little bit more into best hopes, and unusually for me, I have a little crib sheet, not a script, but just a few words. And reason I've done this is I've had a couple of conversations with people, both in supervision and offline, but also I've seen a couple of videos lately, and thought I'd respond to some of the things that have come about. So somebody asked me about our best hopes of way of contracting. Somebody also asked me, what if people don't know about the best hopes? What about when best hopes are dependent on others? And what if there are no best hopes? And finally, does best hopes replace a miracle question? So what I'm going to try and do is give you my thoughts, which aren't, of course, the only answer, but my thoughts on each of these. So best hopes as a way of contracting. Well, I talked about this a little bit in my last video, and planning for exit on entry, planning for um, what are the best hopes that tell you no longer need to come here, and so on. I do think best hopes are a way of contracting, and I don't mean in the traditional counselling sense. You have a counselling contract and you both sign it, and so on, but more that you agree how therapy might be useful for the person that comes. So somebody who comes says, "My best hopes are that I would like to be happier," which is often the case, and a very generic, ambiguous, broad target. I want to be happier. I might start talking about, and how do you think therapy might be helpful in that, or what are the first signs that you would notice after leaving therapy that you were starting to become happier, or so on. So yes, best hopes is a type of contracting, but it's only really a type of contracting that says this is what we're agreeing to work on. This is what we're agreeing you might notice that tells you things are changing. And best hopes can be defined further. Best hopes can change, in fact, and it's our job to check in each time, but we're still working to the person's best hopes. I'll leave that bit there. So, what when people don't know their best hopes? You ask somebody their best hopes, and somebody in supervision said to me recently, "Oh, it's such a difficult question. The clients I work with often say, I don't know what you mean. I don't understand the question." When that happens, my first response to the person I'm seeing is generally to pause and to ask a question again, but to ask it more slowly, perhaps. So, um, what are your best hopes? What are your best hopes from our talking together? Um, if that doesn't get a response, I can explain it a little bit. So, when you leave therapy today, it been useful. How would you know? How would your referrer know it was a good idea to send you here today? What's the first thing that you will notice that tells you that therapy has been useful? Some of those clarifying statements, some of that exploration of what best hopes mean can be useful. Bear in mind, we have a particular language we use, and the people we see don't come into our therapy room knowing the language we use, and sometimes we have to be a little bit more explanatory. So I might even say to somebody something like, "So when you were coming here today and you were thinking about therapy, what were you thinking you might achieve through therapy? What were you thinking might happen? What were you hoping might happen as a result of coming to therapy?" And let's be very clear here, it's not about what happens in therapy. I've said this before, it's about what happens after therapy, which is why we say best hopes from our talking together rather than best hopes for this session. Okay. What about when best hopes are dependent on others? Um, let's give an example. I want my teacher to stop shouting at me. Okay, and I wonder what your teacher would notice that helps them to not shout at you. Um, I wonder what would be happening when your teacher isn't shouting at you. When your teacher isn't shouting at you, what do you notice? Are there times when your teacher doesn't shout at you, and so on and so on? Sometimes best hopes are there. And this is a difficult one because I'm in disagreement with a few people in the solution focus field on this. I do believe you can qualify things in solution focus because we live in a realistic world. So perhaps his teacher is an angry chap and always shouts and all shouts at all the pupils. It's worth exploring. Does your teacher shout at everybody? Okay. Um, so given the fact that your teacher shouts a lot, given the fact that this happens, what are your best hopes from your time spent in the classroom? Okay, so what's the desired outcome really? What do you want to happen? So a couples therapy. My best hopes are that we stop arguing. Okay. Um, and how would you know that this is starting to happen? Somebody might say, "Oh, I try really, really hard, but my partner's always on my case, always having a go at me." Okay, and I might explore gently, always having a go, and we look for exceptions. Sometimes uh, there's a recognition that things can't be different, but the way people respond to them can be different. So I remember a famous The Shazer video, and I know it was an acted video, but it's based on a true script from Harry Coleman, where the Shazer looks around, a guy in a wheelchair looks around, has a chat with him, says something along the lines of, "I guess that's not going to change. What are your best hopes given your situation?" And I think, given this situation, given what's happening, um, in relation to what's going on in your life, I think that's a useful qualifier sometimes. So we mustn't dash best hopes for people, but we can also score and rate those best hopes on a scale of 0 to 10, given what situation people are in. I personally don't have a problem with that. I know people are too quick to dismiss it as an idea, and I also know some people are quite willing to accept. Oh, we can't have best hopes because of this situation. Well, we can. We've all got best hopes, and sometimes those best hopes are not able to be realized fully because of the situation we're in, but we can work around that. And I'll give you a good example. I worked with a young gay man in Barnsley in northern England who's wanted to stop drinking, and his best hopes for coming to therapy, according to him, were to have a motivation to stop drinking. And I asked him all the questions. What's the motivation? How does that work? How will you know? What other people know, etc., etc. And it turned out that the only place he could meet other young gay men in town was at a bar, and obviously there was drink around at the bar. So we looked at a realistic situation there. So given that you're going into a bar, given that you're going into a pub regularly, because that's not going to change, you want to see people, you want to meet people. Given you're in that situation, what are your best hopes for coping in that situation around your desire to stop drinking alcohol? And we worked on that. So I think best hopes are usefully explored sometimes. I have to say, a lot of the time, majority of the time, when I talk to people about best hopes, that they have them, and maybe I'm lucky with the people I see, but there are occasions when you have to work around it, and that's okay. So, what about when there are no best hopes? Again, I find it a difficult one because I think generally people do have some best hopes, and our job is to persevere without interrogating. Our job is to be gentle. Our job is to inquire. Our job is to invite people to think about their best hopes. Sometimes, not very often, I have to say, once or twice maybe, sometimes people cannot express best hopes at that point in time. And it's useful then to forget the term best hopes and maybe look at something else. So, along the lines of, okay, so we're going to have some therapy together. I don't know how long it's going to be. You may not know how long it's going to be. But what would be a good idea for you? What would be a good sign for you that actually therapy was being useful? And people might articulate best hopes in a different way. They may say something along the lines of, um, "Oh well, if I was feeling better next week, I know therapy was being useful," and I might reflect back on along the lines. So you're hoping to feel better, okay? And then we can rework the word best hopes. Okay, I'm going to leave that there because there were some rambling thoughts, and I'm quite happy to answer some of those thoughts or listen to any comments you've got. But just a final thing on, does best hopes question replace a miracle question? Um, It's an interesting one because more and more, but I use Best Hopes, but more and more I've been able to garner a rich description from Best Hopes and not necessarily ask a miracle question or the wonderful question, as I call it. It doesn't necessarily, you may get fantastic detail on Best Hopes, you may not. It may lead to you asking a miracle question later, it may not. I don't think it necessarily replaces a miracle question, but I think it can. I think if you ask a Best Hopes question and the responses you get are flowing and it leads to a rich description and you can ask more and more about that picture of a desired outcome, I think you can. And I certainly found this more recently, and it's maybe my increased use of Best Hopes question. I think you can get a rich enough description that the miracle question is no longer necessary later. I don't preclude ever asking a miracle question again, and I certainly don't say that Best Hopes always works well in that respect. I think the key is what's the question, what's the vehicle that you use with somebody you're seeing to get this rich description of a preferred future of a desired outcome. And if it's a Best Hopes question, great. If it isn't the Best Hopes question, and the Best Hopes question focuses on something less than that description, then a miracle question, wonderful question, might well be useful later. Anyway, I'll stop there. Hope those thoughts have been useful for some people. Hope they've made people reflect, and I hope if people have got some violent disagreements or some real comments they want to make, that they make them on this YouTube link below, where the questions are, the comments are. Sometimes I get emails that are not placed on the site, and that's because people don't feel able to or comfortable about leaving questions on the site. That's okay too. I think the good thing about leaving questions on the site, on the YouTube site, is I can answer them. Other people can answer them. And if you have a solution focused community of practice, then the best way to develop your own practice and the best way to help others in their practice is to communicate in a way that everybody can see. Like I've said on many occasions, I don't have all the answers. I have some thoughts. They're still evolving around solution focus. I'm still a beginner at 27 years of SF. So let's keep going, and I'll keep making videos. Any requests for videos or discussions about particular points of SF, I'm quite happy to respond to too. Thanks very much for your time. Bye bye.